G'day guys, welcome to another episode of Infinity Cricket's World Cup show. Today we're joined by special guest Roshan Abasinghe, who is a former first-class cricketer from Sri Lanka and also a well-renowned commentator. Very privileged to have you on board today for this hangout, so welcome.
Thank you.
We've got Nuwan Ranasinghe, who is an accomplished writer for The Raw, joining us today. He is very passionate about cricket and has been writing for The Raw for a while now, so it would be great to get his insights on the game. And then all the way from Bangalore, we're joined by Ashwin Kumar, who is another cricket insight specialist. He follows India very closely, but also cricket more generally across the globe. Today, of course, we're talking all things World Cup cricket. It's obviously the marquee tournament, happens once every 4 years, and this edition features 10 teams. It's played in England, and of course, all teams will be looking at that July 14th fixture to see whether they can lift the cup. Now, as we speak, we've got a game happening live, which is Australia versus Pakistan. Australia actually batting, and moments ago, Aaron Finch, the captain, was dismissed for 82 runs. We'll talk about that very shortly, but I think to kick things off, and starting with Roshan, look, this week in the World Cup has been kind of up and down. We've had a lot of rain that has impacted the matches, and there's been questions about the scheduling, whether having a reserve day in the group stage is the right thing to do, or is it operationally not the best move. But then we've also had some great matches on the weekend. We saw Australia take on India and narrowly losing that. But more importantly, I think, what do you make out in the last week of the World Cup? And where do you see, what do you see happening in the next few days? Some big matches coming up.
Yeah, I think it's disappointing because, as you very correctly said, this is the pinnacle as far as cricket is concerned. And every team comes to a World Cup with the expectation of performing. And let's also not forget that there are some cricketers who might be playing in their last World Cup. So it's important that they get on the park and they showcase what they have come there for. So in that context, to have a 1 point each is a disappointment because you have a tournament running over 44 days. I, being a television person, I very well understand that there can be challenges, but this World Cup is manned not just by one crew, if you're looking at a television point of view. It's manned by 2 or 3 crews. So, and also, I'm quite surprised that how the ICC just either deliberately missed it or just missed the fact that, the English weather is very fickle and unpredictable. So therefore, rain day is a must. So what has happened, unfortunately, is that some of these teams, are just missing out. Now, okay, it is Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, right? They were not hot when the tournament started. But let's try and understand if it happened to either England or India, who are front runners. I mean, they may not qualify for no reason or no fault of theirs. So, in my humble opinion, I think a rain day is a must. And the ICC has made a huge mistake in avoiding that or ignoring that. And as a result of it, you'll find Sri Lanka now going into a game against Australia 8 or 9 days without cricket. Now, one might argue that, okay, all right, you anyway practice indoors and all that. But for someone who knows cricket, someone who's played cricket will understand that it's about the hours you spend in the middle. It's not about the hours that you spend in a net or somewhere else. So it's not a good situation for Bangladesh or Sri Lanka for that matter. So I think it's not a great start, and I only hope that the weather will improve and the tournament will become more meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point you raised there, Roshan. I think obviously the ICC have come out yesterday and said that this is unprecedented rain. It's the most rain they've had in June on record. So, whilst weather is not controllable by anyone, I think you raise a very good point that, in this case, with the amount of, I guess, marquee or key clashes that you have, because of the format of every team playing against each other, it virtually means every game is you really need to get on the park. And someone like Sri Lanka, you've played 4 matches now, 2 of them have been washouts. A very important clash that you had against Pakistan last week, which both teams would have wanted to get a win out of that. You walk away with 1 point. So yeah, I mean, I agree with your sentiments. Going to Nuwan, Nuwan, what are your thoughts about this issue? Because look, the last few days we've really been hit by the weather, and what's your take on it impacting sort of teams going into the latter stages of this tournament?
Yeah, look, I think Roshan makes some great points there about ICC need to do more. I think again with the whole television issue as well, having reserved days for washed out games is obviously difficult. But having said that, there needs to be a way around this, I think. And we've had 3 washed out matches, which is the most for any World Cup, which is not a good look by any means. And yeah, it does put teams out of sync, out of rhythm. It can sort of affect the way they're sort of them. We talk about things like momentum, So Sri Lanka just managed a very ugly win, I'd say, against Afghanistan. So that it kind of puts teams out of sync a bit. So this is something that the ICC needs to look into. And it would be great if there was like a washed out game, if there was like a second day, or even if we could play a truncated match, maybe like a T20 or something, because I think they were discussing that as well. So there needs to be there are ways around it, and I just think the ICC haven't managed that as best as they could, put it that way. Yeah.
Ashwin, I want to bring you into the piece here. I think, look, logistically, I think the biggest concern is you've got 40 odd matches in the group stages, and if you had a reserve day for each of those, I think we've got a game every day, and then on the Saturdays we have 2 matches, right? So operationally, putting a reserve day could potentially extend the tournament by weeks, right? So that's probably the concern there. But more from a team perspective, Ash, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka have been impacted by these results, Pakistan as well. But Roshan raised a very good point to say that if it was other teams, namely India, Australia, perhaps England, who are in the same situation, would people have then stood up and taken notice?
India could face the same situation tomorrow in Nottingham against New Zealand. I think Nottingham is under the yellow warning danger sign where it could rain, and the weather forecasts for tomorrow are not that great. But the ICC's arguments for their scheduling is baffling to me. I was listening to Joy Bhattacharya yesterday, and he was in charge of the 2017, the under-17 football World Cup. And the way they decide the venues is that the federation looks through 30 years of data of what the rainfall is in that particular month. And then they allocate the venues. I think clearly the ICC have not done their homework, because history would show that, as Roshan pointed out, that June and July is probably the 3rd or the 4th wettest months in England. Yes, it is a case of pure scheduling. I think ICC could have got it better. But also there's a counter argument from the ICC that the format. And this is why the format that they have encountered in comes into play, where teams have 9 games. Even if a couple of games have been rained off, they still have a fairly decent chance, to play themselves back in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, let's hope that, for the sake of the fans and obviously all the viewers as well, that we get some better weather. We know that July, as we get into July, the weather generally tends to be a little bit more dry. So let's hope the next week at least has some cricket. Look, we did have some great matches. On the weekend, we had a marquee clash, which was Australia versus India. That was a game that ebbed and flowed and could have gone either way, to be honest. But at the end of the day, it was the team that held their nerve better that won, and that was India. Key moments there, they managed to seize advantage. And I guess for them, the comforting fact was, and I'll go back to Ashwin very quickly, is the openers' form. So in the first game, we saw Rohit Sharma score 100 against South Africa. And in this match, it was Shekhar Dhawan. There was question marks over his performance leading up into this World Cup, but he seems to find a way, Ashwin, in ICC events, especially playing at the Oval. He has got a stellar record. It was his third one-day 100 there as well, to really step up. So, Ashwin, very quickly on Shekhar Dhawan and India's batting performance before I go back to Roshan.
India's performance against Australia brought a beaming smile to my face. I'll tell you why. I think India do well when their top four is hot and they're firing. And India, for me, to start off that tournament, played a perfect game against played the first game, the second game against Australia. I think they played a perfect game. The template was set out. The top four went out there, scored runs, and put that runs on the board. I think the toss played a very, very crucial role since it was a used wicket. India won the toss. Virat Kohli batted first, put the runs on the board, and when the wicket was slowing down, you saw Warner struggling to put pace on the ball. You saw Smith after when the spinners were on, to put pace on the ball. Virat Kohli had a perfect game. I think India had a perfect game. They won the toss, batted first, put on runs on the board, and their bowlers defended the total. And another key area where India won that game was Virat Kohli's captaincy. Not a lot of people give credit to Virat Kohli, calling him an undercooked captain. But for me, the decision to have Jasprit Bumrah bowl 4 of the last 10 overs where the heat was on was key. If you see in the 43rd over, India and Australia were on par. They were neck to neck, right? India scored runs in the end. Dhoni came out and scored some runs. Virat Kohli, as usual, took his innings deep. But having Jasprit Bumrah in the last 10 overs, have bowled 4 of his last 10, that's where Virat Kohli won the game for India.
Yeah, and I think it was also Bhuvneshwar Kumar as well. So he held his openers back till the end, and they obviously delivered the goods. And it was actually Bhuvi who had a stellar game towards the end. Roshan, you're someone that understands, spin bowling and the importance of that, especially in a big tournament like this, but also playing spin, right? In that particular game, if we saw Australia went in with, Adam Zampa as their frontline spinner over Nathan Lyon. And in that game, he actually got taken to the cleaners by the Indians, none for 50 in 6 overs. But then also Glenn Maxwell didn't fare too well with the ball. It's a leading question. What do you make of this Australian side, first of all, in their performance against India? Probably the first game they got challenged in this World Cup. But then the second question is, Sri Lanka have got a very important clash coming up on Saturday against Australia. And what do you think Sri Lanka's approach will be? Obviously, they will back their ability in spin. Do you see a weakness in this Australian side?
Well, to start with your question about going with Zampa, I was surprised too. But then, if you look at the modern game and if you look at the modern teams today, they're so fond of wrist spinners. They think wrist spinners is the way forward. I mean, the finger spinners seem to be losing the demand they had some time ago, if that's the right word. India have found 2 fantastic wrist spinners, in Chahal and Yadav. And I think they're going to be they're going to be key. They're going to be serious weapons as the tournament progresses. Now, I believe Australia is banking on Zampa for that. But, Nathan Lyon's experience would have counted for it. But you got to understand in what role you play the spinner or your bowlers, because it's about ensuring that you have wickets in those middle overs. Going into the last 10, if a side is having 6 or 7 wickets in hand, then I think that side's going to really get a huge score, just like India. Going in, they were very solid, they were settled. Now, had Australia also been in a similar situation, it would have been interesting to watch. So it's about the wicket-taking ability of a bowler. I don't think spinners are used anymore to bowl dot balls, because dot balls are not going to win you games in limited over cricket anymore. The modern game's not going to win you with dot balls. It's about getting wickets. Today's batsman could play 4 dot balls and hit the next 2 for 6s. So That's how much this game has evolved. So that is, to me, the explanation. And Zampa, obviously, as a leg spinner, can have a bad day. Now, just looking at Sri Lanka's strategy, I can't see them, taking the Australians on with pace, because the match is going to be played at the Oval. It's going to be played on a pitch that is decent and good for batting. So they'll have to look at bowlers who can get you wickets, because to me, this tournament will be won by teams with bowlers, not with batsmen, because the pitches are so good, grounds aren't all that big, and you're not looking at big hitters. Runs are coming, but it's about who will get you the wickets. That's the problem for Sri Lanka. So I would rather gamble. If I was given the option, I would gamble and play Jeffrey Van der Sey, because see, Nuwan Pradeep is still not sure. So, if he's there, it's fine. But I would play Jeffrey Van der Sey just for that surprise element. Even if Van der Sey concedes 70 runs and could get you 3 wickets, he's done the job. That's how the game goes. So it's about restricting Australia, and how do you restrict them? By getting wickets. So I think it's a toss-up about Van der Sey, because Van der Sey has been picked for a purpose to be an attacking option. Sri Lanka's attacking options are Malinga, Van der Sey, maybe Nuwan Pradeep. So I would take that route.
And do you think that the best chance Sri Lanka has to chase? I mean,
no, I think runs on the board, because if you look at the Sri Lankan batting, they haven't still survived the distance. In the first game, they were all out in 29 overs. And then in the next game, when you had 41 overs to bat, they were all out in 38. So it's about not batting the distance. So it's a struggling batting lineup, basically. So, there's nobody who has put their hand up and said, all right, I'm here to score. So I don't know whether they want to have any pressure in chasing a big score. They'll feel comfortable with runs on the board and to bat the 50 overs, get to about 280, 290. I'm not in any way writing off Sri Lanka's chances against teams like Australia, but it's about a good performance. It's if you can win, well, it's a bonus with teams like Australia. That is why I want to emphasize on the fact that the wash-offs against Bangladesh and Pakistan are going to hurt Sri Lanka, because if you look at the standings and if you look at the strengths, I would say that Sri Lanka would fancy their chances in beating Pakistan or Bangladesh more than, shall we say, England, Australia, or India. And the fact that they were coming off a win, the momentum's with them, and it would have helped. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, some very good points. Ashwin, I'll quickly come to you, and then over to Nuwan.
Yeah, Roshan, just going back to your argument of playing wrist spinners, because they're more likely to pick up wickets in the middle overs. I think firmly the quality of the wrist spin matters as well, because if you go back to the India-Australia game, that match was hanging in the balance until Adam Zampa came on. If Zampa had bowled a really good spell there, they could have had India on the mat.
I couldn't have agreed more with you. If you don't have a quality wrist spinner, play the best spinner you have. You see, that would have been my theory. So because Nathan Lyon, any day with all his experience, would have still been able to get you wickets. But this is a myth that most people hold on to. Unless you have someone like Imran Tahir or like your blokes, or even an Adil Rashid, teams are going to struggle. Personally, I think Van der Sey will struggle, because it doesn't speak. I'm not taking away his quality. He is a very fine bowler. I have seen him do well, but this is a World Cup, for heaven's sake.
It's actually funny that you mentioned Adil Rashid being a wrist spinner, but Moeen Ali being a finger spinner has done equally well for England over the last 4-5 years. So which shows that finger spin is definitely not a dying art. You saw Ravi Ashwin bowling brilliantly in the IPL.
But the point is, where is Ravi Ashwin today?
No, I think so. Let me cut
that is the myth.
That is the sad part.
Yeah, because both of you raised some really good points. So I think this is what my view is, and I'm interested to see if I got a different opinion. But I feel like teams, as you said, Roshan, kind of pivot towards having a wrist spinner, right? It's sort of, they go towards that as a strategy. But personally, I would have played line, and I will tell you why I would have played line in that particular game, because he bowled really well against India in the Test series here. You said he's a wicket taker. I think he would have made India play out of their comfort zone a little bit more than Zampa, because I feel like, the strategy against India, you're not going to win with spin, right? They play spin really well, and most subcontinent teams, they play spin really well. Even South Africa went into that game, and it was not because of a strategy point of view. It was just because they lost their best players, but they actually also had spinners as well, Shamsi and Tahir, and they were taken to the cleaners. So I think, we've got to use spin tactically. If it's against subcontinent teams, of course, pace is probably the way to go. But then, if you do have a spinner, have a quality spinner, and whilst he may not play an attacking role against teams like India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, who play spin well, at least then you're not going to be, hit out of the attack, right? Which is what I think happened. Nuwan, I want to come to you because I know you're itching to say something. And I want to actually, go back to another incident that happened. But let me kind of get your thoughts now.
Okay, look, I have a theory on this, and I believe why wrist spinners are playing such a key role is because we've seen a lot of batsmen hit out. Okay, batsmen are more aggressive; they're willing to take risks and go for it. Now, a lot of batsmen are right-handed, and when you have a leg spin, obviously the ball is turning away. Okay, so as a batsman, you're forced to hit against the turn. We've seen that a lot, right? And I believe one reason why the wrist spinners are perhaps a bit more successful is because batsmen are hitting against the turn and they're skying more balls in the air, getting wickets, right? They're getting balls out. So I think that's the reason why leg spin is seen as some sort of a luxury or some sort of a great tactic. And I think that's my view on it. But I don't necessarily believe that having a wrist spinner suddenly means you have an advantage, right?
No, and as you speak, the irony is that Steven Smith has top-edged a finger spinner right up in the air.
Yeah, well,
you actually said a very pertinent stat, Ashwin. The finger spinners have done extremely well, but I feel like
Now, can I come in a little bit there if you don't mind? Just let me thoughts.
Yeah.
See, if you compare a wrist spinner with a finger spinner, the wrist spinner, what he does is with the rotation of his wrists, he will obviously impart a lot of spin on the ball. So the chances are that you will have more dip and turn and bounce.
Yeah.
That's what makes it makes him a potent weapon. But if you're talking about the direction of spin, then the off spinners do the same thing today. They bowl the doosra, they bowl the drifter, they bowl all kinds of things. So they do all that. So the wrist spinner's strength is traditionally the spin he imparts, because if you could see the rotation of this wrist is so much as against a finger spinner trying to spin it with his fingers. So you know that when a spinner imparts a lot of spin onto a ball, what happens is there are times, or almost all the time, that the ball dips on you and then it becomes an attacking option. And with the turn, it bounces, it turns. So that's the reason. So, a leg spinner is always a potential wicket taker, not just now, but if you look back
historically,
So your point is right, but I think it's about the way they bowl more than the direction. That's my thought, but I stand corrected.
Absolutely, and I think it's a valid point. Nuwan, one other incident took place in that match, Australia versus India, and that was when Virat Kohli actually signaled to the crowd and told them to, kind of clap and stop booing Steve Smith. I found that moment to be quite a powerful message. One of two teams, obviously passionate enough to win, and at times, we've seen the incidents on field, incidents between Steve Smith and Kohli. They were captains, but it was heartening to see, an opposing captain, almost get annoyed with his own supporters. Laying into an opponent, and I guess firstly, what are your takeaways from that? And secondly, there's been some mixed reaction to that, which you've observed.
Yeah, look, I think that was a brilliant gesture of sportsmanship, and I think that's the spirit of cricket, right? Virat Kohli supporting Steve Smith whilst the crowd are obviously booing him about what happened in Cape Town last year. I thought that was brilliant, and I think that's what cricket can do. And I was 100% on board. And you saw that they were shaking hands. And even after Australia was getting beaten, Virat Kohli was very gracious with the way he handled that victory and the way he handled the Australians. So I think it's a good lesson for all of us. I think, yes, Steve Smith and Dave Warner did a crime according to cricket, which is quite severe, but it's old news now. It's old news. Move on. They've learned their lesson. They just want to play cricket. And Virat Kohli, he just said that in the press conference. He just wants to play cricket. Doesn't want to cause any other problems. So, I think as a crowd, we like to get a reaction. We like to stir things and things like that. But there's a line that has to be drawn. And I think Virat Kohli, given his influence and his stature as a cricketer, he was the right person to silence the crowd. I thought it was great. But there are also opposing views. So Nick Compton, I believe a former English cricketer, he said Virat Kohli had no right to silence the crowd. Like, who is he to tell the crowd what to do? The crowd are coming to watch him play, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying that what Virat Kohli did was wrong. He said Virat Kohli should just, it's not his problem, basically.
Is that because he's looking ahead to the Ashes and he probably
Yeah,
wants
probably. That's my take on it. And if we look at ball tampering at large, lots of countries have done ball tampering. 3 months after, just after Steve Smith was caught for ball tampering, Sri Lanka's captain Dinesh Chandimal, he was also found guilty of ball tampering against West Indies, right? But the reaction was obviously a bit different. So ball tampering is very common, right? So I think crowds have to understand that as well. And just let this one go.
Another observation from that game. I'm going to bring Ashwin into the piece here. A small section of the media has commentated that Adam Zampa had something in his pocket. It was later found to be a pair of hand warmers. Ashwin, your take on this, and is there any lengths of absurdity in terms of what people will do to project players the wrong way, or is it a case where players themselves have used many tactics in the past and now they are getting themselves in a fix because a few have sort of been caught several times? Faf du Plessis comes to mind. We've had even someone like a Rahul Dravid who used lollies before and unknowingly or knowingly, but what's your take on this particular incident? Something to brush away?
Look, the Australian cricket team have been in the eye of the media after the sandpaper incident, and anything that they're going to do is going to be heavily scrutinized. When Justin Langer took over, he talked about team culture and how the Australian cricket team had changed and how Smith and Warner should be integrated into the new team culture. All of this has raised eyebrows in the eyes of the media. Look, anything that Australia will do from now on will be scrutinized. I firmly believe that those were hand warmers. But hey, going back to the point of Virat Kohli telling the crowd, not to boo Stephen Smith, Virat Kohli is probably the most hated Indian in Australia, and the Australian crowds, they get firmly stuck into the opposition. As soon as any opposition enters Australia, the media as well as the crowd make sure that they feel uncomfortable. And for Virat Kohli to grow up as a human, when he went there in 2014 and he showed expletives to the crowd, for him to come back and tell the Indian public not to boo Stephen Smith, it shows how much Virat Kohli has grown as a man. And yes, kudos, hats off to him for telling the crowd not to boo Stephen Smith. Funnily, it raises another topic. I think audiences now come to watch players as performers and not as individuals. In a completely different game, Kevin Durant went injured. He had an Achilles injury, and entire Toronto was clapping and cheering for his injury.
Yeah, that's the nature of sport at the elite level, right? And I think as the public, we've seen, with the rise of T20 tournaments and the IPL, players are obviously projected larger than life, and the crowds want to be entertained, and so they'll look at any opportunity to sort of create a bit of a bit of a buzz, and that's sometimes good for the game as well. Roshan, I want to ask you about West Indies, right? This is obviously you've been following cricket for many, many years. What is it about the West Indies when it comes to certain ICC events? We've seen them a few years ago. They won the Champions Trophy. Then they won the T20 World Cup. This particular World Cup, it looked like they're in complete disarray. They've actually, been made to qualify to play in this World Cup, and they managed to do that. They've come into this side with Chris Gayle back, Andre Russell, who hasn't played a one-day for a few years. But what's your take on their makeup? And some pundits are saying that they're potentially an outside shot to be the dark horse for the semi-finals. Do you rate them as highly as that, or do you find that it's a side that can get rolled over when the conditions are a little bit challenging?
I think this West Indian side can either blow hot or cold, and I believe that they have a great chance of entering the semi-final. But there's also an equal chance of ending the tournament very ordinary. That's them. On their day, they can be outstanding, just as we saw the way they coped with Australia. Against Pakistan, they looked so good. They were, clinical. The fast bowlers were at the batsmen. They just made sure that, they did what they had to do. But when they let Australia recover from 5 down for very little to that 290 they got, I thought the body language, when the way the West Indians came, they looked a defeated side. Shea Hope looked completely out of touch the way he batted. He was struggling against short ball. Nicholas Pooran didn't look bad. Chris Gayle looked out of depth to me very surprisingly, being given not out and luckily, or given out and luckily reviewing and then, given a reprieve. So this is West Indies for you. On their day, they can be fantastic, just the way they beat England in the West Indies. I mean, I don't think anyone gave them any chance of winning that series, and that's exactly what they did. So if they turn up as a team, they can surprise anybody. Chris Gayle can take you apart. I mean, I've commentated when Chris Gayle got those massive runs in the Bangladesh Premier League, BPL. I mean, some of those innings were just simply outstanding. I thought that I was really fortunate to see those runs he got in the semi-final and in the final. But having said that, let them into the semi-final, that is asking for trouble. They are big match players. When they come into a situation like that, guys like Gayle, Lewis, they can put their hand up and they can really be a force. And one thing about the West Indies in this tournament is they got a decent pace attack. And that pace attack can ruffle a few feathers because they have pace and they can get bigger. So it's an interesting team.
It's a good point. And leading on to pace, Nuwan, another team that probably not blowing hot and cold, they're probably blowing very cold at the moment, is South Africa, right? And in that rain-curtailed match, we saw the West Indies fast bowlers do very well. They actually picked up 2 wickets. Hashim Amla was dismissed with a really good delivery as well. And
just quickly, just a quick one. Then I just wanted to touch base to the other point that Roshan about West Indies Australia game. I honestly have to disagree with you a little bit. I thought the West Indies played all right. Now, what the key takeaway from that game is the West Indies actually didn't play that badly. Australia only won by 15 runs. But if you look at the score, the West Indies bowled 24 wides in that game. Had they bowled maybe half of those wides, the West Indies would have won that game within maybe the 43rd, 44th over. What I believe is the West Indies got a bit carried away with the bowling. They got crazy with the short stuff, and I thought it was very uncharacteristic. And the Windies actually fought hard in that game against Australia. Australia were not celebrating. They were not confident of winning until the 9th wicket fell. So I think the West Indies, they played well, but they lost that game on their own. It wasn't Australia playing better cricket. It was the West Indies not capitalizing on particular points. They could have won that game very easily in 3 particular moments. But for whatever reason, I felt like the overconfidence or they got carried away with the short stuff. And I think these are things that they'll fix up in the games going forward. But that's what I have to say about the West Indies game. Going to your point about South Africa, I think South Africa are a very demoralized side right now. The balance of their team is just really off. You've got like these youngsters that are trying to build their pace attack. You like Felakweya, Rabada, like these are good young fast bowlers, but they're very erratic. They're not hitting the areas that you want. And that's obviously making life very difficult for the South Africans. I just think mentally the South Africans are not there. And given that, you know, AB de Villiers is asking to come back and all this, there's a bit of a Sri Lankan sort of demeanor about this South African team in terms of the imbalance in the side right now. That's my thoughts on that.
Ashwin, coming to hear you here, the timing of AB de Villiers sensationally saying that he was ready to play in the World Cup and even made a request and obviously in the 11th hour for it to be turned down. There's two ways of looking at this. Obviously, the South African management have said that AB de Villiers, if he was serious, he should have made himself available months in advance and should have been part of their setup, and they would have considered that. But obviously, he chose to make a call and at the last minute when they had already named or pretty much had their squad finalised. There's two ways of looking at it. A star player like AB de Villiers, we know the impact that he can make. We know the crowds that he can pull in. South Africa, if there was ever a weakness, they probably went into this World Cup with a very good bowling attack. Unfortunate that a lot of these guys got injured, but their batting was one area that AB would definitely have made a difference. How would you read this situation, Ashen? Is the timing of him even coming out and saying that he was ready to play, considering South Africa have lost their opening few games, is that ideal?
It isn't ideal, but the AB de Villiers saga has actually opened a can of worms, all right? So I have a completely different take to everyone on this AB de Villiers issue when compared to everyone else. Look, if AB de Villiers calls me and says, I'm ready to come out of retirement and play the World Cup for South Africa, I will take it hands down. The job, I believe, look, every country goes into a World Cup trying to win that World Cup. If you're going out to actually make the numbers, you might as well sit at home. All right? The job of a board is to ensure that they put out their best 11 or 15 players they have in that country. And I don't care if it's too late. I don't care if he calls me if he just tells me before we board the plane. If AB de Villiers comes and tells me that he's coming out of retirement and he's ready to help the country, I will take it hands down. And the entire, and look, there is no questioning AB de Villiers' ability to do well right now, even in the international game. If I was Fab du Plessis, I would have said, to hell with about the system and the franchise and the model that you guys talk about. If AB de Villiers gives me a call, he should be on that plane to England. Yeah, and South Africa missed out.
Good point there. I want to go to Roshan here for this because you've been part of setups and you understand how boards work and everything. I find that there are some players in this world that need to be managed a little bit differently or for whatever reason are a little bit more challenging. We see polarizing figures like Kevin Peterson, Chris Gale, AB de Villiers. These are players that even Andrew Simons that comes to mind. These are guys that are undoubtedly talented in their ability. They can win matches, but for whatever reason, the boards have found it tough in managing them. Is it a case where sometimes, knowing the impact the player has, the fan following, and of course a big event like the World Cup, sometimes you just need to throw your rules out the window and have a look at the practical outcome? And in this case, he's a match player that's obviously going to have a positive impact on the team. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense because it's a World Cup. We're not talking of a bilateral series. Maybe the only concern is what conditions AB would have put forward to come back. Meaning, is he only going to play in the World Cup or is he wanting to continue? So from a selector's point of view, if they're looking at a long-term strategy, I don't know whether they will, want to have that. But having said that, you got to decide whether it is going to be a short term or whether it is going to be the long term. Because obviously South Africa's objective should be to win the World Cup at any cost. So you'll do everything to win the World Cup. So AB de Villiers on his day can be as good as anyone. So I would have been tempted myself to have him, honestly, if he was made available. But Actually, Ash, you must understand. I heard that Faf has tried very hard to have him, because Faf had wanted him, But I believe the system in South Africa is that the captain is not as powerful or strong when it comes to the final thing, unlike in the subcontinent. So Faf and the coach has missed out. But you're right, considering where South Africa are at the moment, and you look at how Hashim Amla is struggling,
Yeah.
as a batsman, and when you see how thin the South African batting resources are, AB de Villiers would have, just been a godsend as far as South Africa is concerned.
Roshan, I have a question for you. I have a quick question for you. If
For
you
me?
if you were a selector of that Sri Lankan cricket team,
Yeah.
and Kumar Sangakkara was still scoring runs as he was in England. He was scoring tons of runs in his last season. In England.
Are you asking me whether I will have him?
Absolutely. If Kumar Sangakkara says, I'm ready to come out of retirement and help this Sri Lankan team, would you have him?
Of course, no question. I don't think you need a second invitation, because it depends on where your team is. Now, for example, if you have Rahul Dravid scoring runs for India, or Lakshman, or I'm just picking a random name at this moment, and offering to come out and play for India, I don't think the selectors will even want to look at it, because the Indian batting is so strong and the resources are good. But if you look at South Africa, if you look at Sri Lanka, or if you look at a similar team, particularly Sri Lanka and South Africa, two teams that are very, very, prudently picked. I think it's a good point. We would have, put both hands up for Kumar Sangakkara.
It's a great question and a great response. I share both your sentiments. I think AB would have been great for the fans. Another really key aspect in the last 1 week has been this aspect about the bails. Right? It's been a talking point. It'll be good to get all of your opinions on it. We've had a scenario here where I believe it's been more than 5 separate occasions, where a ball hit the bail, and these are zinger bails that's used for people that are not familiar with this. The stumps light up, and it's obviously a new concept that the ICC is bringing in to improve engagement with the fans and everything. But what it's causing is batsmen to not be dismissed. We saw in that Australia-West Indies game, Gale actually, had that scenario happen to him. And then we actually had another scenario, which was an umpire oversight and a no ball. But particularly about this bail situation, is it something that, considering the amount of games that are still remaining in this tournament, what are the ICC's options, do you think?
Well, look, historically, the only purpose for bails on wickets was just to notify the umpire that a wicket had fallen, right? That's literally all their purpose was, right? So, I think under the, I was an umpire for a couple of years, and I think in the law, the bail, I think now the bail has to come off, but historically, there's no need for a bail to come off. As soon as the ball hits a wicket or makes contact with a stump, it is out, sort of thing, right? That's what I remember. But with the whole bail issue, it is causing batsmen to not be dismissed. And I can recall incident as far back as 2009 when Brett Lee bowled like a beautiful, in swinger to Chris Gale again, and the bail didn't actually move. The bail moved up, right, and then went back into the groove. So the bail went up and then back into the groove. So you got to ask yourself, like, what's happening here? I think a bit more, maybe because my background's in engineering, maybe a bit more development needs to go in sort of the weight aspect of the bails. Is there a way to make them lighter, lesser circuitry in the LEDs that they used to light them up? I think there are things to look at. And maybe the ICC should even bring in regulations on how heavy should bails be, right? In relation to the stumps as well, because we have restrictions on the dimensions for bats and things like that now. So that could be something that the ICC can look at going forward.
Ash, is a bail even required? Right. So that's the first question. One. Second, if you do have the bails, then is there a standard that's required in terms of the weight and the specifications? But they've obviously got to get it right, because the question is, imagine a World Cup final. You have someone like Chris Gale, Virat Kohli, Steve Smith batting, and he's not out. then it's a different situation. It's a question of a World Cup or not, right? So quickly on that, Ash, and then I want to move to another topic, which is coming out of India, obviously, with the retirement of Yuvraj Singh. So very quickly, what your thoughts are on Yuvraj, and I'll go across to the panelists.
Gentlemen, I got to interrupt here. Any chance of I've been excused in about 5 minutes?
Yeah, we're wrapping up in 5, Roshan.
Yeah, you know what? Because sorry, I got to go somewhere.
No,
sorry if I'm sounding rude.
Sounds good. Ash.
Now, technology is a double-edged sword. Although the zinc whales help you in close run-out calls, the disadvantages of that is there in the open. I think the ICC have left it too late to probably change this, because the zinc whales have been in cricket for the last 4 or 5 years, and this problem has persisted. I mean, albeit not at international levels, but be it in the BBL and the IPL, this has been a more prominent, example of the situation that have occurred at the World Cup. I think the ICC should have reacted a lot earlier, but they've missed the boat. Sorry, what was your second question again? I think Yuvraj Singh. Yuvraj Singh, champion player. I think he deserved a better send-off. He was the most elegant left-hander after Saurav Ganguly Indian modern ODI cricket has produced. And don't forget his little pie chuckers that got Kevin Peterson out. That's a bit underrated, but yes, a champion player, and he will be missed. But hey, good things cannot last forever, yeah? Like Roshan, he has to go in a couple of minutes. We can't have him the entire time.
I like that.
Nuwan, your thoughts very quickly on Yuvraj Singh.
Yeah, look, phenomenal player. I was reading a couple of interviews, and Harbhajan Singh quite literally said that the reason why India lifted the 2011 World Cup was because of Yuvraj Singh. So he was man of the series. Very elegant player. Very, very. He's a bit like Aravinda de Silva. He can change the game in a matter of minutes. I recall, I think it was the 2007 World Cup where he hit 6 sixes off Stuart Broad. And those shots were so clean, like they were so crisp, like it was hit ball, and he's that kind of a player, very easy on the eye, and being a left-hander, naturally elegant, of course. But yeah, he'll be missed, and he's one of those once in a generation players. So yeah, fantastic career.
Roshan, you're probably privileged enough to see him live on many occasions. What are your thoughts on him? He obviously was the player of the series in the 2011 World Cup, 15 wickets and over 350 runs in that particular tournament, helping India win. What are your thoughts on his career, I guess, or any parting words?
Well, Yuvraj, I started my commentary career when Yuvraj played in the World Under-19 World Cup in Sri Lanka in the year 2000. The team was captained by Mohammad Kaif, and I think guys like Rithen Sodhi, Yuvraj Singh, and there were a few other guys who played in that tournament. And Yuvraj immediately made an impression, I must say. He was more mature for his age, and he looked a cut above the rest, as everyone here correctly said. He's a player who has had tremendous potential and ability in the white ball game. Unfortunately, he was found out a little bit in the red ball game because he struggled a bit against the short ball, but who doesn't really in the modern game against the real quicks? But come the white ball, I think he was a champion in his own right. That 6 sixers I still remember the 6 sixers in that World T20, the first ever World T20, I believe that was played in South Africa, which India won eventually. So correctly, all good things have to come to an end. And the greatest thing, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to a champion player, is knowing when to go. The thing is, there are lots of players wait till they're asked why rather than why not rather than why. Sanath Jayasuriya made that mistake. I think with all due respect, Sachin Tendulkar made that mistake. Saurav Ganguly made that mistake. I can go on. I'm sure the list is quite long.
Even Ponting, I think. Ponting.
Sorry.
Even Ricky Ponting as well stuck around.
Yeah, Ricky Ponting was an embarrassment towards the end. So Yuvraj, to call it a day, that to me is the greatest thing. That's why I take my hat off to people like Sangakkara and Maharaja, they went at a time when they were at their peak, when people were asking why rather than why not. So that to me was something that I want to admire in you, Raj.
Yeah,
Roshan, I have just
Yeah.
one parting question before I think we let you leave.
Yeah.
I've just recently read that the ICC has sent a memo to all the commentators, asking them not to criticize umpire decisions. So, have you gotten any memo from the ICC
No,
before?
no, no, no. That is, I think, to the commentators who are part of the World Cup. I'm not part of the World Cup, so we don't get. No, 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 never, never, never. We have always had. We've been allowed to speak our mind when it comes to commentary, and we don't basically criticize the ICC or the umpires. I've criticized many umpires, but it's nothing personal. I still remember when Sri Lanka toured Zimbabwe, we had an issue with regards to a third umpire's decision when it came to ball tracking and when it came to an umpire's call. So I actually criticized Mariah on air. And then what happened was Mariah and I, we are very friendly, still. I mean, we'll always have our issues, but, it's nothing personal. Then Sri came up to our commentary box and said, look, you should go and talk to Mariah. So, and then I went and met Mariah, and then he explained what it was. So we've had situations like that. But no, never have we been restricted from speaking our mind out as long as it makes sense and it's not personal.
And do you find this situation absurd where Michael Holding was given a memo or a warning not to criticize the umpire's decision?
I think any kind of restriction, in speaking your mind out when it comes to the game and what is happening, if it is restricted, it's absurd. It cannot happen. You as a commentator should be allowed to express yourself. That's why you're there. Otherwise, that's what people want to hear. People, they want to know an unbiased opinion, not a biased opinion. So obviously, if the ICC is putting conditions or anyone's putting conditions, they're virtually pushing you to be biased. So I think it's absurd, and that should never be condoned.
And
very good points there, Roshan. We're running out of time. I just want to conclude by talking about Yuvraj Singh. I watched him when he made his debut against Australia in 2000. He scored 84. It was a classy innings. But I think, apart from all his cricketing, feats that he did, winning India the T20 World Cup and obviously the 50 overs World Cup as well, playing a pivotal part. For me, it was actually his fight with cancer and winning that. And, no one needs to go through that sort of experience. But for an elite sportsman to have had that when he was arguably near about his prime in his career, and then facing that setback, taking time away from the sport, not knowing whether he's going to come back and play the game again, right? I found that takes tremendous resolve and, won a lot of hearts. And I guess Yuvraj Singh will remain an inspiration to all. But I agree with Roshan's point. He's timed it perfectly. It's time for him to go on, and we wish him well on his second chapter. But guys, look, wrapping up tonight, we've got some great games coming up over the next couple of days. We've got obviously Australia-Pakistan tonight. Tomorrow, big game, India versus New Zealand. New Zealand beat them in the warm-up match. Friday, we've got West Indies, England, which could be a cracker. And if the form guide is to be an indicator, obviously they've had some good performances against England, who are dubbed as the tournament favourites. And then Saturday, we have some big games. Australia versus Sri Lanka. If Sri Lanka can get, perhaps it's Jeffrey Van der Stey who's going to be the secret weapon. But if they get their batting in order, perhaps the spin is what is going to be a problem for Australia. Afghanistan, South Africa, and in this current climate, you wouldn't put past Afghanistan. They've got their own issues with Mohammad Shahzad being made to be basically sent home, and they're in some turmoil as well. So some great games to look forward to. But I'd love to thank the panel for coming on tonight, especially Roshan for joining us for the first time. Thank you for your insights. It's been truly great to have you on board. And also to Nuwan from Melbourne and Ashwin from Bangalore. It's been great to have you guys. We'll see you again next week. This is Nav founder of Infinity Cricket, connecting people through cricket. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you.